Hi guys, so in this video we're going to be talking a little bit more detail about solving quadratics by taking square roots. So in this one we're given an equation and we need to solve it. Now in the last video I mentioned that a quadratic, which means the variable has a squared here, or you're going to have a squared somewhere. Somehow the variable is going to end up being squared. You are going to have two answers. Whenever you have a quadratic, you're going to have two answers. That's why there are two blanks here. And for Khan Academy to understand that you put in the right answer, you have to put the right answer in the right box, which is why it has a smaller and a larger. So you're going to find two answers. And then just whichever one is smaller, you're going to put that in the first box. And then the bigger one you're going to put in the other box. But that means that you need to be really careful about negatives, right? Because if something is negative, it could be a bigger number, like the absolute value could be bigger, but because it's negative, it's smaller. So make sure you're being careful about your negatives on these. So let's go ahead and do this example of how to solve. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to get the squared thing by itself. So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides, right? It's being added, so we need to subtract it. This is just like the solving we've done when it was linear, when there was nothing squared. We're just going to subtract 7 from both sides. So minus 7, minus 7. Sorry, it's not very lined up. So 43 minus 7 is 36. So we have x squared equals 36. So once we have the squared thing by itself, then we're going to do the square root part. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now square root and a squared cancel, but only if the only thing in here is being squared. So I just want to remind ourselves that this is not this, right? I can't just say, oh, because this one is squared, I can just get rid of the square root. If I have something in front, I have to take care of that as well. So I could solve this one by saying, oh, but this is really 3 squared, right? 9 is 3 squared. And then I can rewrite that like that. So now that this whole thing is squared, now I can cancel. So this is 3x. So this was not true. This would be what is true. Now, I'm not going to expect you to do this kind of manipulation. I'm just showing you what you would have to do to be able to take the square root of both sides. You have to have the squared apply to everything that you're taking the square root of. That's the point that I'm trying to make. All right, so let's go back to the actual problem that we're doing. So we do have a situation like that. We do have just the only thing over here is what is being squared. So I can take the square root of both sides. So this side, I'm just going to get x. But on this side, remember from the last video, I have to say this is plus or minus, and then the square root of 36 is 6, right? Because 6 times 6 is 36, but negative 6 times negative 6 is also 36. So I can't just say it's 6. It's either positive 6 or negative 6. Both of them will work to solve this problem. So I could plug in 6 in here, and I would get 36 plus 7 is 43, or I could plug in negative 6, and I would get 36 plus 7 is 43, right? I get the exact same answer, so they're both true. They're both correct answers. So I know that my answers are positive and negative 6, so the smaller one of the two is going to be negative 6, and the bigger one is positive 6. It's not always going to be quite that obvious, but I mean, as long as you get your positives and the negatives right, it should be obvious which one is the bigger one and which one is the smaller one. So that would be your answer on that, and then you could go on to the next question. So this one, says, sorry, it took, yeah, sorry for that pause. I just completely stopped talking. This one says find the zeros of the function. When it says find the zeros, it means replace the f of x with 0. So find the zeros means find x so that this is true. So I'm going to replace this with 0. So I'm going to say 0 equals 8x squared minus 800. And then I have to get the x squared by itself, just like I did in the last question. So I'm going to add 800 to both sides. Remember, we're solving just like normal up until the part where we take the square root. So I get 800 equals 8x squared. And then this is multiplying. So I need to divide by 8, divide by 8. 100 equals x squared. And then I can take the square root of both sides. So once I get to here where all I have on this side is something squared, I can take the square root of both sides. The squared and the square root cancel, so I get x over here. And over here, the square root of 100 is 10, but don't forget that it's plus or minus 10. It's plus or minus 10. Either one would work. So when I put in my answer, the smaller one is going to be negative 10. The bigger one is going to be positive 10. Okay, and then this would be the same deal, except for they give you a number. You don't have to plug in 0 or anything. So, but the steps to solving it would be the same. All right, here is the next example. This is quadratics by taking square roots. The last two examples were the intro practice assignment. This is the regular practice assignment. So these are going to get slightly more complicated because it's not the intro anymore. So this is the situation where the squared thing is not just the x, it's x plus something or x minus something. That's fine. We're still going to get the squared thing by itself. So we're still going to add 36 to both sides. So, oops, I forgot to click on my pen. So we're adding 36 to both sides. So we have x plus 1 squared equals 36. So now we have the squared thing by itself. So we can't subtract the 1 over because it's part of what is being squared. So once we have the squared thing by itself, whatever that happens to be, it's not always just x, as in this case where it's x plus 1. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So because this 2 applies to the whole parenthesis, I can just cancel the squared with the square root. So I get x plus 1. And I get plus or minus 6. So anytime we take a square root of a number, we need to do plus or minus. Now I have two equations. I have the situation where this is positive 6, and I have the situation where this is negative 6. So I have x plus 1 equals 6, and x plus 1 equals negative 6. And yes, you have to split it up into both cases. I can't just subtract 1 here and get plus or minus 5. And you'll see in a second that that would not be the correct answer. So I am going to subtract 1, minus 1, minus 1. And on this one, I do get 5. But over here, I'm going to subtract 1, and I get x equals -7. So here, this is the situation I was talking about where the numbers aren't the same. So if I had just subtracted 1 here, I might have thought that I had plus or minus 5, but I don't. I have +5 and -7. So those are going to be my answers. So again, I'm going to put the smaller one here, that's the -7, and the bigger one here, that's the 5. So this is what I was saying where you need to make sure you're paying attention to your negatives, because if you wrote this as a +7, then you would think it was the larger one, so you would put it here and the 5 here, and that would be wrong. So make sure you're being really careful with your negatives. And this is pretty much the same thing. So the only difference you can have with these is you might have something multiplied out in front of the parentheses. So I really can't write. There we go. You could have something like this where you have something multiplying in front. This is just an example. This is obviously not the same, not exactly the same question. So anyway, it actually will have the same answers, but that's beside the point. So you would add 14 to the other side, just like we did on the last question. You're going to do that first. So 2x plus 8 squared equals 14. And then you're going to divide by 2 before you take that square root, because remember, you have to have the squared thing by itself. So you're going to divide by 2 first. So you get x plus 8 squared equals 7. Then you can take the square root of both sides. And now we have the square root of 7. The square root of 7 is not a nice number. So I'm just going to write plus or minus the square root of 7. This does ask you to round to 2 decimal places. So it wants you to get that approximate answer. I would wait till the very end to do that. So I would write out my 2 cases. So I have x plus 8 equals square root of 7, and x plus 8 equals negative square root of 7. So I would subtract 8 from both sides on both of these. So I have x equals square root of 7 minus 8, and x equals negative square root of 7 minus 8. And then I would put those in a calculator. So if I put in square root of 7 minus 8 in my calculator, I'm going to get approximately, remember it says 2 decimal places, so that's where we're going to round it to, be negative 5.35 is what I'm getting on my calculator. Negative 5.35. And then if I put negative 7 minus negative square root of 7 minus 8, I get approximately negative 10.65. So these would be my answers. So this is the bigger one, this is the smaller one, and those would be my answers for this. So that's what happens if you don't get a nice like whole number. You get an approximation. It will tell you what to round to, or if it wants you to leave it in this form, square root of 7 minus 8, it will say give exact answer. Something about an exact answer here. I'm not sure exactly how they phrase it, but it will say exact answer. And then you would type in square root of 7 minus 8. That would be the exact answer, because this, of course, is rounded because the square root of 7 is irrational, right? The decimal places go on and on forever. So hopefully this helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.